Hello, I'm Lewis Elliott, and you are watching Campus TV. Today I'm joined by the Conservative Parliamentary candidate for Bath, Ben Howlett. So, pleased to meet you, Ben.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to have you here. So firstly, how do you think the hustings went?
Well, hustings went fine. I suppose it's up to the audience to decide whether or not I won them over or not. But the questions are really interesting. The questions were actually really refreshing as well, because often I'm on doorsteps and really local issues come up. So things like, there's a pothole outside this house and there's a double yellow line needing to be painted here. But tonight we've heard everything from international security policy right the way through to what our views are, what my views are on higher education, tuition fees, for example. So I thought it was a really interesting night.
I imagine it was slightly different as well, having a much younger audience who were mainly from student backgrounds as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Students have obviously got their issues, and I don't feel that they've been represented well enough. Not just in Bath terms, but at a sort of national level for a long period of time. And someone who's been a really strong campaigner for young people's issues, in inverted commas, I hate the phrase young people's issues, but there's no really other better way of putting it. Someone needs to advocate for them, really. And, I'm nearly 30 myself, so, if I do become the MP, I'll hold regular constituency surgeries on campus to make sure your views are heard at an appropriate level.
Good stuff. So, Ben, what does the Conservative Party offer students? And especially, what can it offer to students from more deprived areas, seeing as many Conservative MPs come from more affluent areas?
That's it. I don't. I have to admit, I am one of the people who is struggling to get on the property ladder in Bath myself. My parents never went to university, actually. I failed to get into Oxford twice. Luckily got into Cambridge to do my masters. But there's a general sense that people, students, young people, whatever generation, don't feel that their politicians are representing their interests as much as they have done in the past, and they don't necessarily feel that they are like me or you, and I think we need to break that down quite heavily. Now, in terms of what the Conservatives have been doing and want to be doing to help people from more deprived backgrounds to get into universities, the whole point of reforming the tuition fees system was to encourage people from more disadvantaged backgrounds to be able to afford to go to university. So, my father was the only breadwinner in my household. My mum was disabled. He had to fork out upfront fees in order to get me into university, and my brother into university as well. And medical school fees were a lot higher than they were for me to go to university. And actually, under the new system, he would have been far better off. I would have been far better off as a result, because of the reforms that were made. And I think that's an important recognition that I do want to encourage, and we do want to encourage more people from disadvantaged backgrounds to go into universities. And this reduction from £9,000 down to £6,000 that Labour have promised is only really going to help those people who are the richest in society. Those people who don't go to university are therefore now going to have to subsidise those people that do go to university. And I think that's a really non-progressive way of reforming the system.
So would you say, with your different economic background, would you say you're kind of the modern face of the Conservative Party, kind of different to what we perceive to be the Conservative Party? So, for example, in Parliament, about 50% of Tory MPs are privately educated. So would you say you're different and you're offering something different from a Conservative perspective?
I mean, by default, I suppose I went to a comprehensive school, and yes, okay, I haven't got a private school background, and there's a lot of people in the Conservative Party that don't have a private school background. I ran the youth wing of the Conservative Party for 3 years, and there wasn't a single person on the national executive of the youth wing of the Conservative Party that had come from a private school background. It wasn't because we started doing some sort of positive discrimination against people that had, by the way. That was just naturally the way that people wanted to get involved from those sort of normal backgrounds as such. And I'll do everything that I can to sort of make sure that you know that your MP is relatable to you and your issues. And as someone who is sort of going on to nearly be 30, then I have obviously a lot more common ground than you would necessarily with someone who's in their 50s or 60s if they became their MP.
Right, so moving on to more national issues, with the budget being released yesterday, is your long-term economic plan truly working for the people of Britain?
clearly is. It's helping in Bath, it's helping across the whole of the country as well. The jobs rate is at the highest any time since records began. The claimant count in Bath is down by 60% since the general election in 2010. We're obviously helping transform people's lives by getting them into work. And as someone who's a fond advocate of making sure that that people are getting into work, because I think it really does transform people's lives, we've had a really, really good story on that as well. And I think it's really important that we keep on with the long-term economic plan, because we want to make sure that people's lives are constantly transformed over. And I don't want to give the keys back to those people that crashed the car in the first place. Anything like that would end up risking Britain's long-term future and jobs, in my mind. And a lot of people are very worried about the potential outcomes as a result of the general election in May this year.
I'm glad you mentioned jobs. So, for example, recent figures have just come out that in the UK at the minute, 700,000 people are on zero-hour contracts as their main household income. And since the 2010 election, there's been a 50% increase in unemployment amongst the ethnic minority youth of Britain. So, with this in mind, with the idea of this, is it really a recovery that's benefiting the whole of the UK? So, for example, the zero-hour contracts, I like the example of back in the 1920s, dock workers would turn up at the dock gates and the manager would say, work for 1, 2, 3, 5 of you. Whereas now, and they go home, whereas now today, kids get texts at 6 o'clock in the morning telling them whether they have work for the day or not. Is this just not a step backwards under this recent government?
The statistics which have come out of the government have shown that the vast majority of jobs that have been created are full-time jobs. The absolutely heavy number of full-time jobs. Off the top of my head, I can't remember exactly how many, but 0 hours and part-time jobs have been a very, very small proportion compared with the 1.9 million jobs that have been created in the UK. And I think we need to be working hard to stop zero-hour contracts, and I know the government's legislating for that, and I think that's an incredibly important move. But we shouldn't start saying to people who actually want a zero-hour contract that, or a part-time job, that we want to scrap part-time jobs or zero-hour contracts. There are people actually out there that want the flexibility of the environment that they work in. You also touched on, is this a recovery for the entire country? Well, actually, the north is actually currently growing faster than the southeast. And that's an incredibly exciting story to be telling, because that's not necessarily in the perceptions of people at the moment. The Northern Powerhouse is really doing an awful lot of work to grow jobs, and we're seeing a totally national recovery at the moment. But that cannot be put at risk by a party that crashed the car in the first place. We need to make sure we continue on that long-term economic plan, as I talked about earlier on.
Right, well, we'll move on to another national issue, and obviously with the general election coming up, a big thing that the Labour Party and the Lib Dems are kind of campaigning on is the National Health Service. Mm-hmm. And so there's a lot of controversy with the 2012 Health and Social Care Act. Mm-hmm. So this has been asked many times, but is the NHS at risk of being privatised via the back door with this act?
No. I would rather die than see the healthcare service in this country no longer be free at the point of delivery. Okay, my mother has relied on the NHS for 20 years as someone who's disabled, and I'm incredibly concerned as someone who's worked with the NHS now for 7 years. I worked alongside it, making efficiency savings in the back offices of the NHS, that in 30 years' time, people like my mother are not going to get the same quality of healthcare and support that she has been getting. There's a looming black hole in the NHS budget that's coming forwards, and all parties need to be working incredibly hard to stop this becoming a party political football and actually solving the problem head on. If the economy doesn't end up growing, we can't pay for our NHS, we can't pay for other public services, for goodness sake. So we must make sure that we continue on allowing the economy to grow in order to help pay for our ageing population and better quality treatments and care. The drugs funds are growing in funding, and the reforms to the Health and Social Care Bill I actually thought were positive first steps. Of course, they obviously need reform, and if we'd actually got in some of the systems that, funnily enough, New Labour were pushing for, then we'd actually potentially have a very good story to be telling in the future too. Well,
I'd absolutely love to have a bigger discussion on that, but we've come to the end of our time. So you've been watching Campus TV. This has been Ben Howlett, the Conservative candidate for Bath. Be sure to tune in next week for the Liberal Democrat candidate for Bath, Steve Bradley. Thank you for watching, and do look in next week.
Thank you very much.